Adam Cmejla, welcome back to the podcast.
Steve Argo, good to see you, my friend. Appreciate you having me.
I think we're going to talk about something pretty interesting today, and you know that you and I like to bounce quotes back and forth.
Yes, we do.
So
What's the over-under on today's conversation?
I don't know. It's right now. I'm going to be one ahead of you because I'm leading with a quote. Let's see if
Quote
you
with
can.
attribution, right? Because a quote sounds good, but we got to throw attribute. I'm just kidding. I'm just
No,
kidding. Your show, your
I'm
rules.
actually going to have you guess and see if you can.
Ooh, I like this game.
So I wouldn't call it a wildly famous quote, but I'll give you a hint if you don't get it.
Okay.
It's a highly quoted person. So
All
here's
right.
the quote: Focus, and this will tie in with our topic today, by the way. I'm not just randomly throwing quotes as part of the intro. Here we go. Focus comes from saying no to 1,000 things to make sure we don't get on the wrong track or try to do too much. What do you got?
So the Captain Obvious name that I want to say is Stephen Covey. Um, but it sounds like something that would come from Greg McCowan, the author of Essentialism. And if that isn't it, then maybe Tim Ferriss.
All great guesses, and I'm
Ofer.
big fans of all three.
Ah, batting Ofer.
I'll give you a real obscure hint: an iPhone.
Oh, Steve Jobs.
I knew that it was too
Okay.
easy. Yeah. Steve Jobs. Yeah, Steve Jobs said it.
He
So
probably learned it from one of them. Well, maybe not Greg McCown because Greg wasn't really known as much as he is today. Well, Steve. But anyway, yeah, great quote.
I'm realizing how many quotes either aren't attributable to one person. Because here's a funny thing. I was going to give you a different quote, but I couldn't. I knew you're a stickler. And you're going to nail me for who said it. And it was the quote, we all have 24 hours in a day. I thought that was Zig Ziglar, but you go online, the world of the internets will tell you that apparently 50
There's
people.
18 different people that have
Yeah.
coined that quote,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I opted out of that one, but it would have applied too. So the part about, saying no to 1,000 things and making sure that we don't get on the wrong track. And I thought this was a pretty good hook for today's episode. I think what we're going to ultimately do is try to make owners' lives simpler, but also more productive.
Yes.
So the something we talked about before when we were aligning on what to talk about in the beginning, and this is certainly not unique to optometry, but in the beginning, we'll focus on optometry practice owners. They wear a lot of hats, right?
Hmm.
Especially a cold start. And you work with a lot of practices, you've worked with practices just starting out. They are the OD, sometimes is the billing department, the HR department, the marketing department. There's a lot of administrative duties that need to take place. And for some owners, and maybe a lot of owners, as they get busier and the practice grows, it's hard to let that go. And I hear that all the time. And I've really never questioned it, but we're going to question it today.
I love it.
Thanks to your insights, I hear owners say all the time, Tuesday is my admin day. Pick the day. It's my admin day. I don't see patients that day. It's my admin day. But as we know, as a practice grows, it requires additional leadership and vision and strategy. So the point that you made was, do we need to rethink how we approach admin days? So with that background, can you expand a little bit on that? And then we'll dig in a little deeper as we move along.
I so we're recording this early 2025, and I never thought that I'd be in the position to to influence how ODs or how this profession thinks. But I'm going to start. I've already done that on my show, which I know you and I are going to have another conversation over there on 2020 Money, and I've done it on this show and the presenting. So I'm grateful for that opportunity that I've had thus far, and I'll take this platform as one more opportunity to encourage ODs to be careful about what you think to yourself because you're listening. And the idea that I want to toss out there that I've been thinking about, not only for myself in the context of what I do with our firm and the relationships that we have with practice owners around the country, but just in general, which is this idea of admin days and the label that comes with that and how we think about ourselves in our practice. I am a big fan of neuroplasticity, and not even like fan might be the wrong word, but just this idea that events have no meaning other than the meaning that we give them. And as new practice owners, like you'd said, everything falls onto your shoulder from the very beginning of if you're a cold start, right, you're working, hopefully you're not doing this completely solo. Hopefully you've aligned with somebody that has done this before. But even still, you're the one signing the lease agreement, negotiating the buying deals, finding out the equipment, picking the colors, organizing your frame board, hiring your team, figuring out which payroll, what insurances are you going to be on. Like all of these decisions fall onto you because you are the owner. And then as the practice grows and matures and this flywheel continues to pick up speed and momentum in the course of the practice, inertia is an incredibly powerful force. And when you combine the inertia of the day to day, week to week habits that practice owners fall into with the title of that day that they've carved out, which is admin day, I think the thing you and I are both sitting here or wanting to impress upon practice owners is to think differently. There's an Apple quote, right? Uh, think differently about how you show up in your practice. And I think that starts with what you call your admin day. Because if you call, and here's the leap that here's the hypothesis that I'm putting out there. If you call it an admin day, both by the definition of admin tasks as well as the inertia that practice owners have always fallen into, or the inertia of tasks that they've always done, absent inventorying what you're actually doing, you're probably wasting, I'll go out on a limb and say, an incredible amount of time on things that you could very likely either A, delegate to somebody on your team, or B, hire an outside executive assistant, administrative assistant, right? Just by the very nature of that title of who we'd hire is the definition of these tasks that practice owners are probably doing. And then we start asking ourselves, which might be where we take the conversation and toss out some ideas. What's the opportunity cost of keeping that on your plate, and what could you otherwise do at that time? So I want to challenge practice owners to kind of tie up this initial monologue of start thinking differently about admin day, because I wonder if the tasks that are on your plate are truly ones that you should be doing.
I hear a strong element of, is it Pareto principle or Pareto?
Pareto's principle. Yeah.
Pareto's principle coming through, which for those who might, maybe it's better known as the 80-20 principle.
Yep.
That the theory being that it's different ways of phrasing this, but 20% of our efforts drive 80% of our results. And it's a tremendous, I think, exercise that people can and should do to really take an audit on how you're using your time and what activities am I doing and what's driving the greatest results. And part of that audit should involve, what can I stop doing?
Yep.
We're back to Tim Ferriss here, right? What can I stop
Yeah.
doing? What can I eliminate? What can I outsource? And I think that's an uncomfortable position for a lot of business owners who, like you said, they did come up with a mindset, and maybe that mindset developed over time, but feeling like they needed to have their hands in everything. Why is that such a struggle for business owners? I mean, I don't know if this is more unique to optometry practice, more unique to small business. Obviously, bigger companies, you have to delegate. You need different departments. There's aspects of that you cannot be the
Yeah.
CEO of a Fortune 500 company and have your hands in everything. So you have to learn to hire good people and trust them.
Yeah. Jamie Dimon's not running payroll for Chase.
No, no, he's not. But how do we adapt that mindset into a small business?
I don't think it's incredibly unique to optometry, or even if we expand that ring out a little bit more, just the various medical modalities. I do think that it, just by the very nature of how a lot of these businesses start up, I think that's the emphasis. They start up, which brings us back to the genesis of our conversation here. They've been in that situation of doing everything, and unless we are cognizantly taking inventory of what we are spending our time doing, it is very easy to just fall into those habits. I think it specific to optometry or just physicians in general, there is this sense of leadership that they bestow sometimes upon themselves, but more so just in the practice. You're the one with letters after your name. You're the clinician. You're who patients look to. You're the one, Dr. Vargo, Dr. Smith, Dr. Right, whatever that might be. So there is this leadership quality that is part of who they are, and that manifests itself, I think, unchecked in taking over where they're spending their time. Because, and I think that's also complemented in the ownership that they have of their business. I learned this. I had this quality. I'd like to say that I have my dad to thank for it in a sense of, because he was the worst at this. My dad ran a cabinet making and woodworking shop in Wisconsin, and I grew up. I mean, I was working in that shop, I don't know, fourth, fifth grade, right? And dad was a stickler for attention to detail. And that was, I remember as a kid, like one of the phrases that was always talked about in the shop was, well, if it's meant to be, it's up to me. That was the phrase that got tossed around in the family business. And what I realized because of that is dad spent his most precious commodity, which is time, doing things because he had the limiting belief that he was the only one that could do it the right way. And the standards that he set were so high. I'd like to encourage the audience to think or to think about what I'm about to say. Different doesn't equal wrong. Just because a team member is going to do something differently than the way that you would do it doesn't make that wrong. If you are clear with a team member about how you define a successful outcome based delegation rather than task based delegation or process based delegation, as long as all parties are clear about what a successful outcome looks like and they have the resources to be able to accomplish that, they very likely will do it differently than the way that you will. But I think ODs get so hung up on, well, that's the way that I've always done it. And if it's meant to be, kind of they're taking that same philosophy. If it's meant to be, it's up to me. And they'll do one of two things. A, they'll say, I can't delegate this. It's just like, this is the way it's done. This is the way I have to do it. I don't want to do it. Or if it's something new, they'll fall victim to the, it's going to take me more time to train somebody how to do it than if I just take the 5 minutes to do it myself. Oh, to hell with it. I'll just do it myself. And what they lose the foresight of is, yes, that might be true if it's a sample size of one, if it's a one-time thing. But most times these things are either the same thing over and over, or it's a derivative of a common task that's being done, right? The task might be different from week to week or month to month or whatever that might be, but the outcome that we're solving for, the outcome that we're driving for is very, very similar. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. A phrase that I grew up with as well is if you want it done right, do it yourself.
Yeah.
And I think over the years we've realized that's really bad advice. You know, that because
Accurate.
it's just not it's just not good advice. It's slow. As I've heard someone say before, micromanagement is slow. So if you're an owner, if you're in a leadership position and you're micromanaging, you really slow everything down because you don't have the benefit of a team, which you always go farther as a team. I think there's part of this that you do need to get comfortable. It's not even just a matter of if it's different doesn't make it wrong. That's very true. And obviously we've learned that when you have a collaborative approach, a lot of times you'll get new and innovative ideas from other people when you weren't even expecting it. But there's also an element of good enough. Like maybe not everything is perfect, but there's a cost there to feeling like everything has to be perfect. And when you empower other people to do things, even if it's not perfect, it's still going to get you farther ahead. You mentioned a term before, and maybe we can expand on that a little bit. It was one of my favorite terms to come out of my MBA courses. It's opportunity cost.
Yeah.
And I find myself constantly running things through that filter. Basically, if you've got, you can use it in a multiple ways of, examples. You can use it with money, right? If I have $100 to spend on this, that's $100 gone that I can't spend on option B. Also, if I use the next hour of my time doing this activity, that's an hour that I can't use it doing option number two.
Yep.
So when you look at things that way, it really helps you get more focus and clarity around where you should be spending your time and your money and your resources that's going to give you the greatest return on investment.
Well, the thing that I see a lot of ODs miss, and I see this, you know, certainly on the startup side of things in the cold start, but even with some of the multi-million dollar practices that I'm privileged to interact with and we're privileged to have conversations with, like they miss the fact that time is still the most limiting commodity. And is this is yes, this is much more true on an early age practice where you have time. And that's really insidiousness of this concept really takes root in a practice owner's mind and in their habits, because with every new thing that they take on, they're not competing for something else. It's not like that time is already filled. The calendar might be wide open. The task list, yeah, while it might be full, they still view that they have that time because they're not seeing 20 to 24 comp exams a day and right, the plus that comes with all of that. So in the early stages, it can seem like, oh, well, I can say yes to this. I have the time and capacity to do that, until they start reaching that capacity threshold where with every new yes, you don't get more hours with those yeses. What's happened up until this point is you've just spent from an untracked finite bank account minutes, hours, days from the available balance that you have. Once you can't go negative on time, right? You can't be in debit. You can't be in a negative balance on time. And so what ends up happening with practice owners is they start saying, well, I need more admin time. If I only had more admin time, I'd be able to get ahead. And what they realize or what they don't sometimes realize is that what they otherwise could be doing with that time, given the revenue per hour that they are worth to the practice, it would likely be much more advantageous for them to, again, do what I mentioned earlier. Either A, take the initial time, and it might require more time in the beginning to invest in an existing team member, to train them. And it's never become more easy to create the infrastructure and the systems to be able to train. Heck, go to loom.com, subscribe to Loom, do a screen share, start recording on whatever it is that you need to do on the computer using ChatGPT or some other AI. Like, you could record and create a standard operating procedure for something. Like, there are so many different tools and tactics out there to help you on the tactical side of how to actually do this. But it starts by creating the inventory list of things that you should get off your plate, and then asking yourself the question, with this time back, where is my best and highest use in the practice? What's my greatest return on investment from a time standpoint in the practice, which brings to your point the opportunity cost. They don't see that because they're spending what time they feel like they have until they like max it out. And then they're like, that's when they get stressed and they start kind of in that negative feedback loop of feeling stressed. Sorry, I kind of talked myself into a circle there, but hopefully it made sense.
Absolutely. And that comes up a lot. So when we start talking about strategy, sometimes the pushback will be, I don't have time for that. Like, I wish I did, but I don't have
The
time.
irony, right?
Let's really look at why you don't have time for that, though. When we're talking about things that might fall more under strategy than admin, I mean, maybe it's just, a frame board management or marketing or developing a specialty. We could go on, all these different things strategically that would help the practice grow, right? But you get bogged down in the admin stuff. And then the common retort will be, well, I don't have time. But let's really look at why you don't have time. To your point before, well, it's going to take long to train somebody, so I'll just do it myself. Here's the thing about training. I almost always find that to a point, they're right in the beginning. It does take longer in the beginning. It's one of those things, though, that takes more time in the beginning at the front end, but it saves you time on the back end. Now, you can put yourself in a position where you've got untrained staff and how much extra work that's going to be, because what you end up doing, you're doing all their work for them.
Mm-hmm.
And you're way overpaid to be doing a lot of those tasks. And not only that, but you're putting out all the fires that came from not training them and developing them in the beginning. So there's a pretty good ROI on that time. But I think there's ways you got to look at getting the time back. And I think really one area that I would look at is training other people and getting more comfortable with other people doing tasks that you used to do to allow yourself time to do those things.
Well, I think it's one of my biggest pet peeves and I've gotten away from saying this. It took me I've been doing this now for a couple of years. One of my biggest pet peeves is exactly what you had said just previously. I don't have enough time. I don't want to put an E next to the podcast episodes here, so I'll say bull crap, right? You have a lot of BS, and I'm not talking bull. You know what? I'm talking you have a bad limiting belief system. You don't have a time problem, you have a priority problem. So rather than saying I don't have enough time, this is why, again, it's an example of We have to be careful about what we tell ourselves, about what we think to ourselves because we're listening. If you start saying, I, rather than saying, I don't have enough time, say, I'm sorry, Steve, you weren't just a high enough priority for me. Like if you would have emailed me and said, Hey, Adam, I'd love to do a podcast with you. And I would respond back, Sorry, Steve, I don't have enough time. What I'm implicitly saying in my response is, You're not enough of a priority for me compared to the other things that I have on my list. Now, you and I are recording today, so clearly you are a priority, and I appreciate our.
Apparently, 7 emails is the magic number before you just got so annoyed with me that
Right.
you agreed.
But case in point, what I do, what I have implemented in the practice is a filter. So once I agreed that, yes, I want to prioritize this time, the last time that you heard, that was the first and basically last time that you heard from me until we hit record today. Because my team took care of the scheduling and took care of the links and the calendar blocking and things like that to make sure that that happened. Now, truthfully and candidly, scheduling snafu because we're booking back to back recordings. But my point is, I directed the strategy. I didn't execute on the actions, if that makes sense. Or I wasn't responsible for the task management. So to bring back, you mentioned Tim Ferriss, one of the, like his book, The 4 Hour Work Week, really changed how I thought about my time and how I deployed that in the business and just in my life in general. And I just found out in his newsletter yesterday that he has a new book coming out, which is called The No Book, which really excited. No, like N-O, not no as in knowledge, but no as in I'm not going to do that, which I think will be interesting given the context of this conversation. But anyway, one of the phrases that I really resonated with as it came to delegation from the 4 Hour Work Week was never delegate something that you could automate and never automate something you should eliminate. And so the message behind that I would encourage all practice owners to do is coming back to Stephen Covey, or not Stephen Covey, Peter Drucker, right? What gets measured gets managed, and what gets managed improves. You can't try and improve something until you figure out where you're at. And this is something that I'm doing at Seco at the end of February. I've got a 2 hour session where I'm talking about I'm going through a delegation boot camp, if you will. And one of the first things that we're going to do, spoiler alert for anybody that's going to be attending Seco, is we're going to take inventory of what you've been doing. That's where it starts. Look at your calendar. Look at your email sent box. Look at your text message threads. Look at your internal chat conversations if you're using Slack or some other instant messenger in your office, and start inventorying what you are doing on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. And then the next thing that I want you to do, sorry, I'm jumping into action items here. You can pull me up for air if you want after this, but the next thing that I want practice owners to do, so this is early January. You may not have your numbers yet, but when you get even if you don't have them right now, take all of 2020, take previous year or do trailing 12 in your financials, right? Hopefully you're all using books and benchmarks, so you're accurate financials. You know what your numbers are, and your books are getting closed and reconciled accurately and correctly and timely. Do trailing 12 revenue. And then look at what your total owner compensation is. Translation, how many cents of every dollar did you as the owner, were you able to extract out of the practice? Divide that by the total number of hours that you spent in the practice. What I want you to do is figure out your hourly rate. When I've done this with practice owners, they are surprised at how high that hourly rate is. And then when we reconcile that against the task list that they've done on their list, and we say, would you pay somebody your hourly rate to do those tasks? I'll just let it breathe there for a little bit, right? There are certain things on there, yes, that definitely fall to the owner. That's why I'm thinking of this as a, change it. I don't know what the word will be because I know admin day just kind of rolls off the tongue. I don't know if it's a strat day or owner's day or, strat short for strategy. I don't know what that name is, because there are items on there that do require your investment of time as an owner. But I can say with a fair amount of certainty, having gone through that exercise myself, as well as with other owners, that there's a decent amount of, I don't want to say fluff, because there's likely still things that need to get done on that list, but you could do it. Somebody else could do that at a much lower hourly rate than what you're worth to the practice. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So is it mostly a monetary decision? How do you decide? Because I think a lot of doctors, owners, managers, people in general start to look at that list and decide what do I need to take off? And is it just monetary? Do you start looking at what are my strengths and what are my weaknesses? What do I like doing? How much of
Yep.
that should be factored in that doesn't necessarily have a dollar sign attached to it?
This is great. You're giving me like a trial run of my 2 hour session at Seco. I love it. This is awesome. So, what I have found to work well, it's kind of the intersection of a couple of different concepts and ways of thinking. Number one is just what we did, like what's the opportunity cost and what's the true quantitative financial metric of it. The other part of this is, and I think Adam Grant has talked about this. He's a Wharton School of Business. I think he's like a behavioral psychologist, but like the guy is insanely productive. Has been published. He's written like 10 books, published hundreds of times, and the guy's like 41 or something like that. But he talks about above the line, below the line activities, which is what you were alluding to, Steve. What do I actually enjoy doing? Like if there is something on this list that I can demonstrate quantitatively is not a good return on investment from an hourly wage standpoint, but damn, I absolutely love doing it. Okay. We're at least making an informed and educated decision because it comes back to what are we solving for? To your question, is it a pure quantitative thing? No, it comes down to what are you solving for? If you're solving for time, if that's the biggest thing that you're solving for, then we might discount the value of, I really enjoy doing this. Well, yeah, I really enjoy doing this, but dang, it takes a lot more time than I wish it did. So we have to first be clear, what are we solving for? My three favorite successive questions. What am I solving for? In service of what? And then at the cost of what? And so if we do that above the line, below the line exercise, and we take the inventory, that first step that I talked about, right? Just go back the last, I promise you, if you do just a week, you'll have a decent inventory of all the things that you're doing. Now, put them through the filter of above the line. I either A, really enjoy doing them, and or they contribute to the economic impact of the practice, right? They're driving revenue in the practice in some way versus all the other things that are below the line. Like these are, oh, if I have to close my books one more time by myself, or if I have to run payroll, or if I have to do like, we know, and usually, at least when I did this myself and other people that I've taken through this exercise, I don't know the exact ratio, but there's usually a lot more things below the line than there are above the line. So that's the other part that you do is to kind of take it through that filter, the qualitative filter of above the line, below the line. The last exercise that you can do is something that Jim Collins wrote about in Good to Great, which he wrote. It was so important that he actually wrote, like I believe it's a whole chapter on it, on Good to Great, which is this idea called the hedgehog concept. So the hedgehog concept from a practice owner is taking inventory for yourself of what am I the best in the world at doing, right? Maybe not the world, but that's the emphasis. Like, what am I really, really good at doing? What drives my economic engine? And what am I deeply passionate about? So the way that he illustrates that in this book, it's basically kind of a Venn diagram. Each one of those is its own circle. And then in the middle of that Venn diagram, where it intersects, where all those things intersect, is where you should try and identify the finite, very critical items that you should be doing in the practice. That one, admittedly, is probably harder to do for practice owners just because like what am I the best in the world at doing it at doing? Well, for a lot of practice owners listening that are still in clinic, it's likely going to be seeing patients. Like that's going to be the greatest return on investment that you're going to have in the practice is seeing patients. Where that starts to where that foundation starts to erode is if you are truly scaling a practice and building enterprise value by creating multi-location, multi-doctor practices where now by the nature of you staying out of practice and building the infrastructure to hire more ODs, you now get that get the effect of scale. But most practice owners are going to have yes, the best and highest use their hedgehog concept is seeing patients as well as a key or a few key other items that that they're deeply passionate about and or drive the economic engine. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. I want to talk about a byproduct of having just too much stuff to do
Yeah.
administratively, and maybe the things you don't necessarily want to do is burnout, professional burnout, a huge, huge problem. And it's even especially huge in healthcare. Data has shown that doctors specifically experience a significantly higher rate of burnout. I think if we want to get morbid here, the suicide rate of doctors is
Yeah.
significantly beyond the general public, which is obviously concerning and alarming. Interestingly, I think if you talk to a lot of doctors or people just in healthcare, and you ask them, what do you think would be the antidote to burnout? I think their mind goes to getting away from patient care, right? Taking more vacation, getting more time out. When the research has actually shown that it's not getting away from patient care, it's changing how we provide patient care. If we could get back to a world where you had that time, like you said, probably the most productive and enjoyable time for many ODs, maybe not all. Some of them like the business side of things. Some of them like leading and managing people, and they're more than happy to step away. But for a lot of them, they, whether it's full time or part time, still enjoy patient care, treating patients, helping people. Part of the reason they got into it, it's part of their DNA, right?
Yep.
So burnout actually has been shown to significantly subside the when that gets restored, when that ability to spend time with the patient. Um, to help people to feel like you're playing a role in their health, their lifestyle, with their vision. So it brings us back to burnout. The more we can reduce some of these outside factors, the more that we would give them the time back to be able to practice the way they want to practice.
I think so what was the quote? I want to bring it back from the very beginning, from the opening, your opening line of the episode, because I think what you just said, I think it's important to share it again for listeners because it's
It,
directly attributable to what you just said.
yeah, I think I said something along the lines of the that a byproduct of having too much stuff to do is burnout.
Yeah. No, no, sorry. Beginning of Steve Jobs quote.
Oh,
What was
okay. Going
Steve's?
back to the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah,
My memory's not that good, but I have it written down here. I can
there you
read it
go.
for you. Focus comes from saying no to 1,000 things to make sure we don't get on the wrong track or try to do too much.
I mean, that one quote basically summarizes the last 90 seconds of what, or whatever the time was
Mhm.
that you're talking about burnout. I mean, you're exactly right, Steve. And that's where I think the insidiousness of practice ownership and the lack of guardrails that practice owners put around themselves. And the reason that I get really passionate about that is because I've been on that journey myself as a practice owner, as a business owner, as a multi business owner, where squirrel, right? Ooh, shiny object. Let me go pursue that for a little bit. And you start thinking, it's not going to take that much time. It's just, it's 4 hours. I was involved in an advisor coaching program, separate business that I exited at the end of 2024. And I was involved in that business from 2020 through 2024. And I just kept telling, it's like, it's a couple of trips a year on site coaching with advice and in a one Monday a month. And while that was true from a time standpoint, what I underestimated was the mental bandwidth that an additional iron in the fire was taking and how that was influencing how I was showing up in the flagship business view, like my main business, the wealth management consulting firm. I underestimated that. And I wonder how many practice owners are falling, I hate using the word victim to that, but are not aware of that, of the additional things that are on their list that are taking away, right? Remember what I said earlier, with every new yes, we don't get more hours to allow us to accomplish that yes. We are, if with every new yes, we are saying no to something. Whether we're aware of that or not is kind of the context of this conversation. The irony of it is usually what we end up saying, or usually what ends up paying the price for every new yes, are the things that that were in service to. Let me try and rephrase that and have it impact the way that I want it to impact. With every new yes, the irony is what we are saying no to are the exact thing that we want to actually do by via practice ownership, right? We own a practice. We get into practice ownership and business ownership because we want the freedom that can come from it. We want the financial rewards and benefits of not only having the ownership side of it in the form of profit margins, but then at some point when we want to sell the practice, there's enterprise value on our personal balance sheet that we can sell to a willing buyer and have that liquidity event add to the nest egg that we've saved and retire and do all the things that we want. And if we don't measure our time and allocate it accordingly, that's where we end up charting at night. That's where we end up buying on the weekends and going through frame books on the weekends. And that's when we're not able to coach our kids soccer games or hockey games or whatever that is, because we still have to keep the practice open till 7 o'clock Tuesdays and Thursdays, because that's what our patients are used to seeing. And like, you just start doing that inventory and you realize that eventually you have become in service to the practice instead of the practice being in service to you. We're big fans of talking about intentional ownership with practice with practice ownership. And it starts by putting guardrails around the finite number of hours that you have in the week and what you are going to say yes to, but more importantly, what you're going to say no to. The business, the practice that you own, it will be the most selfish relationship you ever have in your entire life. Your business, your practice will take as much from you as you give it without recourse or apology, unless you do in part what we're talking about here today. Unless you put guardrails around that, unless you start becoming clear about what you're going to say yes to, but more importantly, as your success trajectory continues to go up and those minutes start becoming more and more precious, you inventory what you should start saying no to, or as I think David Allen talks about in Getting Things Done, which is a great framework to think about task and project management, the 3D method. You either do it if it takes 2 minutes or less, you delegate it, or you delete it, right? The 3D method. And again, that's a whole nother discussion, but I get really passionate about this topic, and that's why I'm grateful for you allowing me to come on your show and on this platform here to share, because I've seen it happen with my parents, which all gratitude to them for, they didn't know it at the time, but it, by observing that with them, it made me cognizantly aware of it myself. And even though I was aware of it, it still kind of bit me in the you know what. And I'm grateful that I made that observation and become, dare I say, ruthless around how I allocate my time. And I just hope that this conversation thus far has motivated ODs to think differently about how they're spending their time in their practice.
And I love that term. Every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And we really, you brought up a point that I was going to get around to, but you beat me to it, the lifestyle aspect, right? At
Yeah.
some point we go home and we've got kids and maybe we want to go on vacation and just have some free time and go golf. And a lot of times that's the casualty of not strategizing the business, and how you're handling that will eventually bleed into your personal life. And you probably hear it as much as I do, right? Here's
Yep.
one thing I found out about consulting is that the first call, nobody really opens up that much. It's always, if someone's calling about cost of goods, right? They're going to
Yeah.
call up
Right.
and say, I want to get my cost of goods down. But almost always behind, there's what I've come to realize is the problem behind the problem. And I've actually made myself, I think, a better consultant in trying to get to that story, because the more you get to know somebody and the relationship develops, and I'm sure in the finance side you hear it too, you start to hear about the frustration. You start to hear about somebody who just wants to, feel like they're not spending enough time with their kids. They haven't been on a vacation in 2 years. There's problems maybe at home, right? It leads always into, if you got business problems, it's going to lead somehow or some way into your personal life. So again, it's another casualty of not being mindful of how you utilize your time and doing the things that you need to do. You mentioned something before, on the three, the author's name is blanking right now. You'll get it as soon as I say it. But back to Tim Ferriss, because
Mhm.
it's been a long time since I read the 4 Hour Work Week. But if I recall, Tim Ferriss, that what led him into that was a lot of stress in his work life. He was starting businesses. He was very stressed, depressed, and wanted to figure out a way to not have to allocate so much time to the business. And that's what led to his um, basically his strategy of wanting to figure out how he could delegate and automate things. And I always remember from his book these three things: delegate, eliminate, automate.
Yep.
And so what can we delegate? And that's looking at your team. That's back to making sure that they've got the training that they need, and what things could you take off your plate, eliminate, which we don't look at nearly enough. What are the things we could just stop doing, you would miss?
Yep. I mean, yeah, he called
We
it
automate. And so
deal.
I think it's really important to consider that on my lifestyle side of this.
Yeah, he
Deal.
talked
Yeah.
about deal, which was define, what was it? Define, eliminate, automate, and liberate. Like, you had to define, okay, which is kind of what I talked about in the beginning, right? we can't improve what we're not measuring. So we first
Mhm.
have to define what it is that we're solving for. Once we define it, now we can figure out, okay, back to your Pareto principle, like what are the things in the practice? What's the 20% that we're doing that's driving 80% of the revenue? And it might not be that exact 80-20 rule, but spoiler alert, it's probably going to be pretty close. There's a reason why Pareto's principle, like he was studying the dispersion of wealth in Italy and just realized that 80% of the wealth was tied up by, or not tied up by, owned by 20%. And just started realizing that, oh, there's a lot of things that follow this general guideline. So, okay, out of all the things that I'm doing, what are the things that I could eliminate slash delegate? I would put, who am I to tell Tim Ferriss how to define his acronym, but I'll take a stab at it right now. Your
If it
show and
were
I'm on it,
me,
right?
yeah, look at you.
Eliminate slash delegate. And then the automate part of that, right, certainly leads into that. And then the most important one, which is just what you had mentioned, the liberation. What is all of this in service of? Right? We want
Yeah.
to golf. We want free time. We want to travel with our spouse. We want to do college visits with our kids so that they're like, again, everybody listening, if I were to ask you, what are you doing all of this in service of? Everybody is likely going to be able to articulate to themselves a handful of really, really important people or causes, activities that are important to them. And then that could open up a whole nother can of worms of like the proverbial, or not proverbial, but the common, people on their deathbed don't regret not buying the right investment or having a lower net worth. They regret not having the experiences and spending more time with their kids. And we've all heard that ad nauseum. The question here, as I know you and I are fond of doing when we have these conversations on these shows, is what's your next best step?
Interestingly, that's what I was going to close out with.
I love it.
So no, I was going to say let's close out on an acronym.
Yeah.
So you put that in an email you sent me. The next best
Yep.
step.
The
Can you expand
NBS.
on that? And I don't know if I came up with this on my own or I read this somewhere, but I've had this acronym I've been floating around for about a year, and it keeps me on track
Okay.
because I'm an overthinker. And
Yeah.
Adam, I don't know how I've ever got anything done in my life because if I will allow myself to do it, I would overthink everything. And I think I read this somewhere that sometimes you just stop thinking, take a deep breath, and just let it come to you. What's the next best thing I can do right now? So mine has been the next most important thing.
Okay.
So sometimes I find myself overthinking. I feel like I'm juggling a bunch of, balls here, and I'll just go, okay, hang on. What's the next most important thing I can do right now? And it's not always work related. Sometimes it's just like, hey, I haven't checked in with my kids today. I'm going to go down and
Yeah.
talk to them for a little bit. But it keeps me action oriented, and
Yep.
I found for me that really works. You sent something that resonated with me because you had your own like next best step. Just elaborate on that. We'll close out there.
Similar. So I don't know if you've done any of the personality assessments or
I have.
inventories, things like that. So my Colby scores are 7,464. So that's fact finding, follow through, like the quick start, and then the implementer are the definitions of those numbers that I just mentioned. So as a fact finder, as a seven, I tend to just dwell on things and like I got to gather all the data and I got to think of all the different things and just start. I'm a good ideator. I have a lot of my working geniuses are wonder and innovation. So I have a lot of these ideas, but then when I want to execute on them, I will fact find every day and twice on Sunday. So I've started, and I talk about this on my show on 2020 Money a lot. At the end of every episode, I want listeners to think of what's their NBS, what's the next best step. Don't think of all 35 things that you have to do. Don't think about I've got to do that. No, 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 no. Just pause. What's the next best step? Because what will happen, and this is what I've observed myself, is when you just have clarity on the next best step, just by the nature of you taking action on that one thing, the next thing will show up. You'll inherently be observant of what you will work on next, whether you actually know it or like the phoenix rising from the ashes, it will just kind of manifest in front of you when you're working on that. You'll know what the next best step is, and you have to trust me on that by just taking the first next best step, if that makes sense. So
Yeah,
my
inertia.
recommendation, yeah,
The
yeah.
word you used earlier.
Well, and that's the hard part with podcasting as a specific medium is that I think it would be a fair bet to say that almost everybody listening right now, listening to this show is a secondary activity. They're driving, they're exercising, they're working out, well, it's January, so depending on when this releases, they're not mowing the lawn. Maybe they're shoveling the sidewalk, right? Depending on part of the country. So it's a secondary activity. And so what can often happen in podcasting is we just go on to their day. We just All right, that was a good episode. Yeah, I got my little dopamine hit, and hey, look at me, rah rah, self improvement. I checked the box. So here's your next best step. Everybody likely listening on your phone right now has some type of AI or some type of verbal assistant. I don't know what Google Voice, I don't know what Android's is, but on Apple it is. I'm not going to say it because it'll kick up, right? Siri, right? Just say, hmm, remind me to remind me about my next best step from Adam and Steve's conversation on, like, I don't care, 7 o'clock tonight, just so that you have another reminder to pop up at a time when you will likely be able to open up a calendar and then actually block off the time to do the inventory that I talked about. That would be the true, in my opinion, that would be the true next best step. Carve out, you probably will only need 30 minutes or less. Carve out 30 minutes, look at your inbox, look at your instant messages, your Slack, and look at your calendar for the past week and start compiling an inventory of the things that you've been doing to start, again, determining what do I actually need to be doing versus what can I start creating this list of doing. And last point that I'll say, guess what happens when you create a really, really long list of things that can be done by somebody else? You can either A, go to somebody in your office and have a clear list of things that you can talk with them about, or you have a job description and you can go to Fiverr or Upwork or Athena Assistant or any one of these third-party remote assistant platforms. Find an assistant in the Philippines that can do some of this admin work at $5 an hour. Gotta love geocurrency arbitraging or international currency arbitrage. Like, there's so many things that can be done to free up your time. So sorry, that's the NBS. Open it up, put a reminder on a calendar for later today to actually block out time to start inventorying your activities.
There you go. There you go. Thanks, man. This was great.
Thank you.
I knew it would be. I hope
You
we
put a
helped some
quarter in
people.
me. I apologize if I got long in the tooth on a couple of answers there,
I'll
but
just take it out later.
well played. Well played.
I'll just take it out.
I'm passionate about
No.
this stuff, so I appreciate you allowing me to share.
Yeah, and I know it's part of your world as well. I mean, on the finance side, I know it's personal for you. It's not just helping people to manage their money better and make more money, but I know because I've known you for a while that it matters to you how your clients the outcomes they're getting, not just professionally but personally as well.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
and speaking of that, for tell us a little bit, maybe we'll close out here about the services that you do offer if people aren't aware, and how would they find you and find out more about your company.
Yeah, the to kind of continue in this platform, the long time show that we've had going, we now have 300. I can just say safely 320-ish episodes of 2020 Money. That show is all about helping optometrists, practice owners specifically, make educated and informed decisions with their money in and out of their practice. To learn more about the firm and everything that we're doing on the basically personal and professional CFO side of things, integratedpwm.com, where we do, obviously, like I said, those personal and professional CFO services, as well as practice transitions. We've got a new book coming out, aptly titled How to Buy an Optometry Practice, as well as a couple of other irons in the fire that, interestingly, are kind of the antithesis to what I just spent this entire episode talking about. But I have an incredible team around me that allows us to deliver a great experience and allows me to be in the kitchen cooking up these additional values for the optometric community. So I appreciate you allowing me to share.
Well, awesome. Podcast is great, and we really look forward to the book. And we're gonna bounce off here and go record one on your side for the 2020 Money podcast. So definitely check that out as well. So thanks again, Adam. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate you as well, my friend.
Thank you for listening to everyone who caught this episode. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to our podcast wherever you're listening, leave a review, and share it with your friends and colleagues. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And to learn more about iDoc, you can visit our website at idoc.net and check out the links in our show notes for some helpful resources for your practice. See you next time, and keep dreaming big.